Can you trust the text in our modern Bibles? Is it the same as the one read by the first Christians? One of the oldest books in the world will give us the answer. And that book was discovered at St. Catherine's Monastery in the middle of the Sinai Desert in Egypt. It's hardly surprising that there's a monastery here at the foot of Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, there's the other biblical name for it. And this monastery goes back almost to the beginning of Christianity, maybe the 3rd century, and has been continuously used as a monastery, as a place of meditation, as a place of reflection ever since. The monastery library has one of the best collections of ancient manuscripts. And with my friend Tor from Norway, we have an appointment with Father Justin, the librarian.
Welcome.
Justin. It's so nice of you.
Welcome.
To receive us here at the monastery.
It's nice that you came. Let me take you inside.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to St. Catherine's Monastery. This is the library, and I'd be very happy to show you around.
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting us, Father Justin. That's it's really a dream come true to be able to come and visit.
The building that we're in has been newly renovated. The building itself dates from 1951, but in 2009 we began the renovation. We stripped the building back to the bare core, and then we rebuilt everything, and we finished it in September 2017. So that's what you see here. We have chairs and tables to make an inviting place for the scholars to study the manuscripts. We have the reference books that scholars would need when they come here, and we've tried to make a pleasant and productive room for the study of the manuscripts. Many scholars want to come here, they don't have time, or they are hesitant to come here, and that's why they depend increasingly on the photography programs that we have. We are photographing manuscripts with high-resolution digital cameras. We will post them online, and that way we can share the heritage that we have. Many spiritual people are hesitant about technology, and people that are very well versed in technology very often are not developed in the spiritual life. And the Archbishop is amazing in combining the both. And he sees the photography of the manuscripts as protecting them, because in the scholar is studying the photographs, not handling the original. But of course the scholar sees it as making the manuscripts more accessible. And the Archbishop has said we have an obligation to share the heritage that is here, that has been preserved in the isolation of the monastery for so many centuries.
It's not the technology in use at the monastery today which is the reason for our visit. Our concern is the ancient Bible manuscript discovered here by Constantin von Tischendorf in 1844.
Codex Sinaiticus. Jeg kan forklare litt om selve navnet. Det første ordet, kodex, det betyr at dette er en bok, i bokform, med side til å bla. Mange har kanskje et slags indre bilde av at de første kristne bøkene, det var bokruller, rullet opp på 2 pinner, slik som i jødedommen. Og bokrullen, det var det fine bokformatet i antikken. Ikke bare jødene, men hele den antikke verden brukte bokruller til fine verk, diktverk og viktige bøker. Skulle det være fint, så skulle det være på rull. Så fanns det et annet format, det var en kodex. Det bestod altså av papyrusark som var bretta, og lagt flere ved siden, eller inni hverandre, og flere slike bunker ved siden av hverandre. Og så sydde en disse bunkene sammen i bretten, og la et skinnomslag rundt. Og da har du altså vår bok, med siden til å bla i. Og de kristne var altså 200 år tidligere ute enn hele resten av antikken, med å ta i bruk kodeksen, og løfte statusen til kodeksen fra en simpel bruksbok til et format for viktig og betydningsfull litteratur.
Eusebius was one of the first to write a church history, and the whole history is in praise of the Emperor Constantine, who has now put an end to the persecution of the scriptures, and he has established the new capital, Constantinople. And he mentions that the emperor wrote him, and he said, "Send me 50 copies of the scriptures for the churches that I have founded in the city that is called by my name." So when the Roman emperor makes a request like that, you don't say, "I'll get to it when I can." And he mentions, and so we made the 50 copies quickly. We had them magnificently bound, and they were sent to the emperor. And we do not know what form these were in. Were they just copies of the Gospels? Were they lectionaries? Were they New Testaments? Were they the complete Old and New Testament, or a combination of all of these? But we know that the Codex Sinaiticus dates from that time, and it would have been a very costly volume to produce. And so it remains an intriguing thought that it was one of these 50 copies of the scriptures commissioned by the Emperor Constantine himself.
En vet at den første kristne keiseren i Romerriket, keiser Konstantin, han fikk jo til en stor forandring i synet på kristendommen. Forgjengeren til Konstantin, Diokletian, han forfølgde kristendommen og prøvde virkelig å få brent samtlige eksemplar til kristne bøker. Så at det er noe som har overlevd fra før 300-tallet i det hele tatt, er nesten et mirakel. Men så skjer det et kolossalt omskifte med det såkalte toleranseediktet til keiser Konstantin i 313 etter Kristus. For Konstantin er den første kristne keiseren i Romerriket, og han gjør da kristendommen til en lovlig religion, med et slag, fra å være forfølgt til å bli altså en lovlig religion i Romerriket. Konstantin fikk laget 50 store pergamentbibler til bruk i de viktigste kirkene i Romerriket. Og så er spørsmålet, hvor finnes disse 50 biblene i dag? Er det noen av dem som har overlevd? Det er umulig å vite om Codex Sinaiticus er en av disse 50, men det er fullt mulig. Det er flere ting som kan tyde på det, blant annet den utrolig flotte utføringen som manuskriptet har. Det er en virkelig praktbibel. Det blir ikke produsert like flotte bibler, hverken i århundret etter eller deretter, at det går flere hundre år, før det blir laget en bibel som er like flott, som har like høy kvalitet på alt som Codex Sinaiticus. Det dyre og tynne og fine og feilfrie pergamentet, det nydelige håndskriftet som må ta lang tid å framstille, alt vittner om en ufattelig høy kvalitet. Så kanskje er Codex Sinaiticus framstilt på keiserlig befaling. Keiseren ville i hvert fall haft midler og makt til å stille bak, slik at den kunne framstille en slik praktfull bok.
The manuscript is written entirely in capital letters, so is called majuscules, and in beautiful handwriting.
It would have been very painstaking to write in this style, page after page after page. It required a great discipline, a lot of training. But the result is staggeringly beautiful. Your eyes have to adjust a bit to the fact that there's no word separations. And sometimes, because they're writing in narrow columns, they break the word or the line in unexpected places. But once you get used to that, it is a very beautiful text to read. In the classical world, texts that were not meant to be kept were written on papyrus. Papyrus is the pith of the papyrus plant, and they would cut this into thin strips, place them at right angles, and then beat them, and the mucilage in the plant would cause them to mesh together. And it is surprisingly strong, very supple. It is an excellent writing material. But because it is vegetable fiber, in a Mediterranean climate, it would last about 100 years and then deteriorate. So a manuscript written on papyrus had to be copied regularly. A more permanent writing material is parchment, but parchment has always been very expensive, and it is a very specialized craft. You can't just find a sheep in the desert and think, I'm going to make a piece of parchment. It's a very specialized craft, and it was done in metropolitan areas where you had a large number of animals being killed for the meat. And the people who made the parchment had to take the animal skin immediately and start processing it. They would put it in lime, they would remove the hair and the fat, they would stretch it on a skin, on a frame, and then they would shave the skin until it becomes thin. What's surprising about the Codex Sinaiticus is that it is so thin and the sheets are so even. With a caliper, they measure between 1/4 and 1/10 of a millimeter.
It was this manuscript Konstantin von Tischendorf discovered at St. Catherine's Monastery.
Tischendorf den første i historia som virkelig via livet sitt til å reise ut og leite aktivt etter gamle manuskript av Bibelen. Og han skal til og med ha skrevet et brev til forloveden sin og sagt at du må vente noen år på meg før jeg kan komme og gifte meg, for jeg nødt til å gjennomføre en lang reise i øst på leiting etter gamle manuskript. Og hun ventet, så vidt oss vet.
Konstantin Tischendorf came here 3 different times.
Yes.
1844, 1853, 1859. It was when he came here in 1844 that he took 43 leaves with him that are today at the University of Leipzig. It was when he came here in 1859 under the auspices of the Emperor of Russia that he was shown the rest of the manuscript, and he was beside himself with joy because he realized the New Testament is absolutely intact. And even to this day, it's the world's oldest intact New Testament. So he asked, could the manuscript be sent to Cairo where he could make a transcription, and his transcription would be the basis for the publication of this text. And the monastery felt an obligation for scholarship, for the study of the scriptures, so they agreed. They sent the manuscript to Cairo. It was given to Konstantin Tischendorf in sections. He took it to the German embassy and he wrote a transcription. But there are corrections. There are corrections on the corrections. There are places where the text is very faded. And he was hesitant that his transcription was going to be sufficiently reliable for publication. And that is when he asked, could this manuscript be sent to St. Petersburg? He would be there on hand for the publication, and then the manuscript would be returned to the monastery at its first request.
Så Tischendorf var altså på leiting aktivt etter gamle manuskript, og kom i 1844 til klosteret ved foten av Sinai-fjellet. Og fikk lov å komme inn og leite i det store klosterbiblioteket på leiting etter virkelig gamle manuskript fra Romerrikets tid. Og hva som så skjedde, det ikke så godt å si, for her deler fortellingen seg i 2 varianter. Den ene varianten følger da dagboken til Tischendorf, som framstiller historien slik. At da han kom ut fra biblioteket, så fikk han øye på en stor fletta korg, og oppi der lå det gamle manuskriptark. Og han så at dette var gamle ark, som han var svært interessert i. Men til sin skrekk så Tischendorf at denne korget sto like i nærheten av en bakerovn i klosteret. Og Tischendorf fikk da det inntrykket at munkene hadde begynt å bruke gamle manuskriptark fra biblioteket til opptenning, til å tenne opp i ovnen når det var kaldt i klosteret om morgenen, eller når de skulle ha brødbakst. Og Tischendorf framstiller det da i sin dagbok som at han selv er redningsmann, den som berger manuskriptet fra videre ødelegging, og får overtalt munkene til å slutte å tenne opp i ovnen med gamle manuskriptark. Han kommer tilbake 2 ganger, og tredje gangen han er der, i 1859, da er det en i klosteret som viser han resten av manuskriptet som de første arket var fra. Det er Codex Sinaiticus. Og Tischendorf blir så opprømt over det han ser i dette gamle manuskriptet, at han blir sittende oppe hele natten og bla fra side til side og lese i det som han forstår er det eldste manuskriptet han har sett av tekstet i Det nye testamentet. Opplevingen er så sterk for Tischendorf at han skriver senere at å sove ville føles som en forbrytelse. Det ville være helt feil å legge seg og sove, så han satt oppe hele natten for å granske dette manuskriptet. Den ene varianten av historien sier altså at Tischendorf er redningsmannen, den som berger manuskriptet. Den andre varianten kommer fra munkene i Katarina-klosteret, av dem som er munker der i dag, som vil forsvare sine forfedre. Eller forfedre blir kanskje feil ord å bruke når de taler om munker i et kloster, men altså de taler på vegne av munkene som var der på 1800-tallet, da Tischendorf kom dit. Og fortellingen fra munkene er helt entydig at de følte seg lurt av Tischendorf. De kan til og med legge fram et håndskrivet brev som skal være signert av Tischendorf selv, der han erkjenner at manuskriptet er eiendommen til klosteret, at han får ta det med seg som et lån, og at han lover å komme tilbake med det. Og det har da ikke skjedd.
This is where the history gets very complicated. The community drew up an agreement with Konstantin Tischendorf. He was given this manuscript on a loan, and it was to be returned to the manuscripts after the publication of the text. And Konstantin Tischendorf gave a personal letter where he reflected this same language. He was taking this as a loan. He promised to return it to the monastery at the monastery's first request. In 1862, when it was published, it was the oldest Bible known, and so it became sensational. And the Minister of Education in Russia pointed out that they were obligated to return the manuscript. But it was Konstantin Tischendorf and also the Emperor of Russia who said, perhaps other avenues will present themselves. And so they began a negotiation. And the story is that the monastery depended very much on the income that it received from the properties and gifts that had been donated to the monastery in Russia and the Ukraine at that time. And the Russians impounded these income, and they said, we will not restore them until you sign over the codex. So the monastery did sign over the codex, but this agreement was achieved under constraints. That is where the story of the Codex Sinaiticus gets very, very complicated. In 1933, when Stalin was desperate for funds, he sold it to England, and they purchased it for the price of £100,000, a colossal sum of money at that time. So today, if you go to the British Library, you see the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Alexandrinus. They're always displayed next to each other as the great treasures of the scriptures from the early church.
Now, the manuscript was split between 4 different libraries. Many scholars wished for international collaboration to reunite the entire manuscript and make it available in digital form. However, that kind of collaboration would be difficult to accomplish.
The Archbishop was first approached in 2002. Would the monastery be willing to collaborate with the British Library, the University of Leipzig, and the State Library of St. Petersburg to conserve all the existing leaves and fragments and to photograph them, and then for the first time there would be a facsimile of all the existing leaves and fragments. And at first the Archbishop was very reticent. He thought, how is that possible? And so he dictated an icy letter of response. Given our differences over this manuscript, any thought of collaboration is out of the question.
With this brusque rejection from the Archbishop of Sinai, the initiative for collaboration would have died completely had it not been for the work of a person who thought it had to be possible to find a different solution.
But then people who knew the Archbishop spoke to him and they said, we'll never resolve our differences about this manuscript, but can't we set them aside to accomplish something so important? And then the same person went to the British Library and said it was a mistake to have a junior member of staff write the Archbishop of Sinai. The letter had to come from the director. And so then we received a letter from Lynn Brindley, and she signed herself, I remain your eminence's most obedient servant. And with this preparation on both sides, then the Archbishop was willing to entertain the idea.
Thanks to successful diplomacy, the collaboration project came back on track. Experts began digitizing the entire codex, and in 2009 the result was published on a dedicated website just for this manuscript. There, both scholars and the public may examine every page of the ancient book.
And one of the things that we accomplished through the collaboration was having the entire text online. And many teachers have told me that even a beginning Greek student can find a familiar passage of the Gospels, can go to that text in the Codex Sinaiticus, and then feel that he is reading for himself a 4th century manuscript. The Codex Sinaiticus has been absolutely essential in arriving at the earliest level of the text. And anyone today studying the textual history of the New Testament must become familiar with the readings of the Codex Sinaiticus. Many scholars would want to stop there and say, now we are at the earliest levels of the text. We feel that that's only the beginning point. What is the meaning of the text? What is the significance of it? What is the significance of it to me? And that is the interpretation of the text, the hermeneutics. And that is where the scriptures become living scriptures. The history of the manuscript is so complicated, and some people zero in on that and they lose the significance of the scriptures themselves. And that's what I try to point out.
Jeg har selv møtt forholdsvis ville teorier om det nye testamentet.
The discovery of Codex Sinaiticus has been very important to prove the stability of the New Testament text throughout the centuries. That fact has become even more established in the years since Tischendorf visited the monastery. As many as 67 of the ancient Bible manuscripts we know today date from a time before 300 AD.
Så det er ikke lenger mulig å påstå for eksempel det som står i Da Vinci-koden, en svært populær roman, der en av hovedpersonene påstår at de 4 evangelia oss kjenner i dag kom inn i Bibelen først på kirkemøtet i Nikea i 325. Det kunne du påstå også etter funnet av Codex Sinaiticus. For Codex Sinaiticus viste bare et nytestamente fra midt på 300-tallet. Etter 1800-tallet har oss altså fått 67 funn som går enda lenger tilbake i tid. Så de kan sammenlikne og se. Jo, det er de samme 4 evangelier som står i et nytestamente på 200-tallet som på 300-tallet. Det er de 4 evangelier som opptrer støtt. Aldri 3, aldri 5. Alltid de 4, Matteus, Markus, Lukas og Johannes. Det er de bøkene de kristne har lest helt fra starten. Og de står også i Codex Sinaiticus. Og hva det Codex Sinaiticus da viser oss? For det første så viser manuskriptet oss at det skjer en del når manuskript blir skrevet for hånd. Det noen varianter i skrivemåten av ord og uttrykk som varierer fra eksemplar til eksemplar. Så en viss variasjon på mikronivå, kan du si. Men samtidig en ufattelig stor stabilitet på det du kan kalle makronivå, på de store, viktige tingene. Det viser at det akkurat de samme bøkene som i Nytestamentet, i Codex Sinaiticus. Det de samme bøkene, det jo de samme historiene, de samme fortellingene. Og fortellingene har akkurat samme poenget. Det Jesus som går på vattnet og herre over både vinden og sjøen. Det det samme Jesus-bildet oss finner i disse historiene. Fortellingene kommer i samme rekkefølge fra eksemplar til eksemplar. Så på makronivå så samtlige eksemplar av det nye testamentet identiske. På 200-tallet, 300-tallet, 500-tallet, 900-tallet, på reformasjonstiden, så de like. De har en helt ufattelig stabilitet i teksten. Så når du tar med dette i berekningen at det håndskrivet, og det vil nødvendig medføre variasjoner i ordlyden, så viser Codex Sinaiticus at teksten til det nye testamentet har hatt en ufattelig stabilitet gjennom århundrer. Den ikke en forfalskning. Det har ikke vært noe tillegg, ikke vært noe som har vært trekt fra, ingen historier som liksom luka ut, ingen historier som har fått en annen tolking, en annen betydning, fordi en har forandret på det gjennom historia. Ingen kirkemøter som har gått inn og redigert innholdet, ingen bibeloversettelser som har kunnet forandre på selve budskapet. Det en helt jevn, konsistent gjennom historia i disse bøkene.
Our visit to St. Catherine's Monastery has showed us that you may indeed trust the text of our modern Bibles. The important question is, what are you going to do with the message of the Bible?
These are not just historical texts. They are the Gospels, and we try to form our lives in accordance with the Gospel, so then they are living texts to us. And that is the significance of them. These are not just historical documents, but they become living scriptures to us.